to make people buy things they didn't need before. Well, it's certainly not free enterprise or open markets. The true description is government-sanctioned monopolies, right out of the Mussolini fascist playbook. And the third E, ecological integrity. Well, that's just the excuse for it all. To understand the power of the transformation of society under sustainable development, consider this quote from the UN's Biodiversity Treaty, which was also introduced at the 1992 Earth Summit. It said, quote, "Nature has an integral set of different values, cultural, spiritual, and material, where humans are one strand in nature's web, and all living creatures are considered equal. Therefore, the natural way is the right way, and human activities should be molded along nature's rhythms." End quote. This quote lays down the ground rules for the entire Sustainable Development Agenda. It says humans are nothing special, just one strand in the nature of things, or put another way, humans are simply biological resources. Sustainablest policy interprets any action man takes as direct damage to the environment. This is necessary, sustainabilists say, because humans only defile nature. In other words, sustainabilists view man as nothing more than a swarm of locusts which swoop down on nature and sucks it clean until there's nothing left. Nothing good comes from man, according to sustainabalist doctrine. And private property ownership and control is a main target of sustainable development. Consider this quote from the report of the 1976 UN's Habitat I Conference, which said, quote, "Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, therefore contributes to social injustice." End quote. The fact is, Agenda 21 is a blueprint to completely change our society to a top-down planned central economy in a strange mixture of socialism, fascism, and corporatism. To convince the American people to accept it required something that would get us to sacrifice our natural rights voluntarily. The answer was environmental Armageddon. You must sacrifice freedom to protect the planet. It's urgent, we're told. Do you doubt that? Then consider this quote by Alexander King, the co-founder of the Club of Rome. He said, in quote, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like will fit the bill. All of these dangers are caused by human intervention. The real enemy then is humanity." End quote. So the urgency is on. Global warming is feeding the hysteria. There's no time to consider things like individual concerns and wants and needs. Sacrifice, cries the sustainabilist. We must save the environment. Go green. Get out of your cars. Stop using energy. Cut your carbon footprint or perish. And so, federal and state governments, working hand in hand with a horde of non-governmental organizations, private groups with personal political agendas, force passage of rules and regulations passed down to local communities. But, say your local officials, none of that UN social stuff is true, just conspiracy theories from right-wing radicals. We're just creating the tools necessary in an effort to manage growth and development in our community, they say. Have you heard these? Then consider this quote from J. Gary Lawrence, a planner from the city of Seattle and an advisor to the President's Council on Sustainable Development. He said, quote, "Participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many who would actively work to defeat any elected official undertaking local Agenda 21. So, we will call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth." Local indeed. Sustainable development is the process by which America is being reorganized around a central principle of state collectivism using the environment as bait. This is a political movement led by those who seek to control the world economy, dictate development, and redistribute the world's wealth. They use the philosophical base of Karl Marx, the tactics of Adolf Hitler, and the rhetoric of the Sierra Club. Everything connected with sustainable development translates to higher costs, shortages, and sacrifice. The best way to understand what sustainable development actually is can be found by discovering what is not sustainable, according to them. Maurice Strong, Secretary General of the UN's Earth Summit, said, quote, "Current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class," that's you, by the way, "involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable." End quote. So, how is this wrenching transformation being put into place? There are 4 very specific routes being used. In the rural areas, it's called the Wildlands Project. In the cities, it's called Smart Growth. In business, it's called Public-Private Partnership. And in government, it's called Stakeholder Councils and non-elected boards and regional government, or reinvented government. You take them one at a time. The Wildlands Project was the brainchild of Earth First's Dave Foreman, and it literally calls for the rewilding of 50% of all the land in every state back to the way it was before Christopher Columbus set foot on this land. In 1983, when Foreman first dreamed up the scheme for the Wildlands Project, he said, quote, "It is not enough to preserve the roadless, undeveloped country remaining. We must recreate wilderness in large regions, move out the cars and civilized people, dismantle the roads and dams, reclaim the plowed lands and clear cuts, and reintroduce extirpated species." Have you noticed every single one of these things have been done to the state of Washington? Destruction of human civilization was his goal. In reality, the Wildlands Project is a diabolical plan to herd people off the rural areas and into human settlements. Crazy, you say? Yes. Impossible? Not so fast. From the demented mind of Dave Foreman, the plan became the blueprint of the UN's Biodiversity Treaty. So now the scheme is international in scope with the power of law. Thomas Lovejoy, a science advisor to the Federal Department of Interior, said, quote, "We will map the whole nation, determine development for the whole country, and regulate it." And your local elected officials are helping to implement this insanity, yet they are quick to deny that such ideas have their origins on the international level. They accuse me of wearing a tinfoil hat and hearing voices. Well, here's a voice I hear. Again, Maurice Strong said at the UN's Earth Summit, quote, "Isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized nations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about?" And that is the true agenda of what we face. But how do you remove people from the land? Well, one step at a time. There are many tools to put in place to stop human activity and grow the wilderness. Deny grazing and water rights on public lands. It becomes more difficult and more expensive to run the farm or the ranch, and eventually it goes out of business. Lock away natural resources by creating more national parks. It shuts down the mines, and they go out of business. Call every mosquito-infested swamp and occasional mud puddle a wetlands, and ban any development around it. Invent a spotted owl shortage and pretend it can't live in a forest where timber is cut. Shut off the forest, then when there are no trees to be cut, there's nothing to feed the mills, and then there are no jobs, and they go out of business. The governor of Maryland is enforcing an agenda, without a vote of the legislature, I might add, called Plan Maryland, that will lock away over 400,000 acres of land, banned from any development for over 20 years. One of the key provisions of the policy is to ban septic tanks as a means to protect the Chesapeake Bay, even though there is no evidence whatsoever that septic tanks cause any damage. The only result of the ban will be to make it impossible to live in a rural area, unless you want to spend several $1 million on a private water treatment plant. Getting people off the rural lands and into cities is the real purpose, not environmental protection. The Wildlands Project comes in many names and many programs. Wilderness areas, comprehensive land use plans, bikeways, greenways, heritage areas, land management, rails to trails, open space, wolf and bear reintroduction, conservation easements, and many more. The most direct Wildlands Project threat to you in Washington is the Yukon to Yellowstone Project, or Y to Y, which will lock away or control massive areas of the state. Each of these programs is designed to make it just a little harder to live on the land, a little more expensive, a little more hopeless. In reality, the process is simply herding people off rural lands and into human habitat areas or the cities. The second path to sustainable development is called smart growth. They put a line around the city and tell you no growth can take place outside that line. Urban sprawl, they say disdainfully. They refuse to build more roads as a ploy to get you out of your car and into public transportation, restricting mobility. New highways, they say, are feeders to more development. They even stop the widening of existing roads for the same reason. So roads become overcrowded in gridlock, and they blame development. Their new ploy is to force cars to share the road with bikes, the complete street, they call it. In many smart growth cities, new apartment buildings now have no garages or parking lots. We don't want any stinking cars here. Smart growth creates an unnatural restriction on space inside the controlled city limits, so now there is a shortage of houses and prices go up. That means populations will have to be controlled because now there is a shortage of land. And that's why kind, compassionate environmentalist Dr. Jacques Cousteau declared, in order to stabilize world populations, we must eliminate 350,000 people per day. Sustainabilists call for an 85% reduction in human population. Now, I've made arrangements. We have out here when you leave, there will be some containers of Kool-Aid. Each of you do your patriotic duty and take a drink, and I guarantee you there'll be no sustainabilists in your way. They won't be in the line. Yeah, right. How do you reduce the population 85%? Do we use the proven success of China's population control methods of forced abortions and sterilizations? The Chinese, I can tell you, are big supporters of sustainable development, and I'm sure that they have some great ideas that they can share with us. Of course, comprehensive development plans are the tool of choice to nearly every city in the nation to produce the proper smart growth community. Through these plans, energy and water is tightly controlled. Smart growth advocates force individuals to live in denser communities that take up smaller tracts of land per housing unit. Planning advocates and government bureaucrats are forcing such planned communities across the nation and the state, and those plans put severe controls on private property. The fact is, in a sustainablest community, there can be no private property. It's community property. And the third way to sustainable development inside the human habitat areas, our cities and our towns, government is steadily being controlled by an elite ruling class called stakeholder councils. These are mostly NGOs who, like thieves in the night, just show up to stake their claim to enforce their own private agendas. The function of legitimate elected government within the sustainabilist system is fast becoming little more than the rubber stamp to create and enforce the dictates of these councils. It is the demise of representative government. And the councils appear and grow almost overnight. You'll find watershed councils that regulate human action near every trickling stream, river, or lake. Meters are put on wells. Special action councils control home size, tree pruning or removal, even the color you can paint your home or the height of your grass. Historic preservation councils control development in downtown areas, disallowing expansion and new building. Sometimes they even disallow repairs on existing buildings unless specific, expensive, and even non-existent materials are used. In rural areas, We find the establishment of fire safety councils that prevent those living in rural areas from removing vegetation and dead trees from wooded areas of their own land, because to do so wouldn't be natural and damages the ecology. So, as a result, forests can't be cut, farmers pay taxes to draw from their own wells, commercial fishermen can't fish, and regulations cover all possible human activity. Once the councils are established, it becomes nearly impossible to discuss issues with your elected representatives. Instead, they will automatically refer you to the proper council or administration or department run by unresponsive appointed hacks armed with their own political agenda. These non-elected councils fit almost perfectly the definition of a state soviet, a system of councils that run to an apex council and then implement a predetermined outcome. Soviets are the operating mechanism of a government-controlled economy, the exact opposite of a constitutional republic. And the fourth path to sustainable development, as I mentioned earlier, public-private partnerships. You hear the propaganda of the public-private partnerships on your television nightly as their commercials tell you to go green. And they use Congress to build more wealth and power. GE and Sylvania used their partnership with government to ban their own product, the incandescent light bulb, and replace it with the new green bulbs that by next year you won't be allowed to buy 100-watt incandescent bulbs. Why? Because GE and Sylvania and others will make 3 times as much from the new ones as they do now on the incandescent bulb, because they're more expensive. So, such is the reality of green industry. The truth is, there would be very little legitimate green industry if not for the billions of dollars in grant money shelled out to the partnerships to develop alternative energy schemes. In fact, wind energy may be the least sustainable and least eco-friendly of all electricity options. It probably requires more energy to manufacture, haul, and install these monstrous windmills and their transmission systems than that windmill will generate in its lifetime. Yet the nation, in the name of sustainable development, is investing everything in our future to enforce wind power over real energy providers. Alternative energy amounts to less than 1% of our energy needs, and for every green job created, 2 in legitimate industry are lost because of green rules and regulations. America has now discovered that it has a near infinite amount of shale oil in literally every state. But rather than celebrate our good fortune to reduce gas prices and eliminate dependency on foreign oil cartels, the sustainabilists are rushing in a near panic to block the drilling of shale oil. Moreover, recent government reports show we have more than 2 trillion barrels of untapped oil under American soil, untapped and banned because of sustainable policy. To the sustainabilist elite, who loathe competition in free markets, such a change in the status quo is terrifying because their control is highly profitable for those industries as they take the tax money through the public-private partnerships. And now, there is a new kind of corporation being developed through public-private partnerships. It's called benefit corporations. As my friend Michael Shaw of Freedom Advocates describes it, imagine a legislated brotherhood of business where favored businesses get to go to the front of the line for permits, licenses, and opportunities merely because they agree to advance the principles of sustainable development and Agenda 21. 6 states already have benefit corporation legislation: Hawaii, Virginia, Maryland, Vermont, New Jersey, and New York. And 5 more are in the process of making it part of their state corporate legal system, including California, Colorado, Michigan, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. This policy will destroy free enterprise, and it will guarantee that we cannot stop Agenda 21. Now, many Americans ask how dangerous international policies can suddenly turn up in local governments, all seemingly uniform to those in communities across the nation and around the globe? The answer? Meet ICLEI, a nonprofit, private foundation dedicated to helping your mayor implement all of these policies. Originally known as the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, ICLEI, today the group simply calls itself ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability. They really had to get that name international out of there. In 1992, ICLEI was one of the groups instrumental in creating Agenda 21. Its mission now is to implement Agenda 21 worldwide, and it is having tremendous success. ICLEI is now operating in more than 600 cities in all 50 states. The group is shooting for 1,000 member cities in the next 3 years. Each of these cities pay dues to ICLEI to receive its programs. When local governments contract with ICLEI, they agree to implement Agenda 21 policy of sustainable development. Here's just some of the programs ICLEI provides cities and towns in order to spread their own particular political agenda in the name of community services and environmental protection. Software products and associated training, access to a network of experts, newsletters, conferences and training workshops, toolkits, online resources, case studies, fact sheets, policy and practice manuals. These tools are used to fully indoctrinate employees at City Hall to assure only sustainable policies are considered. And then there's notification of relevant grant money. That's the important one, money with severe strings attached. For example, here's a direct quote from the Environmental Protection Agency's website concerning one of these grant programs. Quote, "The Sustainable Development Challenge Grant Program is also a step in implementing Agenda 21, the global plan of action on sustainable development, signed by the United States at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. All of these programs require broad community participation to identify and address environmental issues," end quote. So, for local officials here, and for those who continue to deny any connection to Agenda 21, please take note. It is the EPA which said these grants were designed to implement Agenda 21.